man plants and God laughs. It's true. Right? Because as soon as you print the plan, before the ink is dry, right, the plan is wrong. The question is always, how wrong is the plan? So from an S&OP perspective, I always like to step back, and my favorite question is, okay, what's the problem we're trying to solve? And when we're casting the annual operating plan, typically we start at the highest level.
Growing a business requires a holistic approach that extends beyond sales and marketing. This approach needs alignment among people, processes, and technologies. So if you're a business owner, operations, or finance leader looking to learn growth strategies from your peers and competitors, you're tuned into the right podcast. Welcome to the WBS Podcast, where scalable growth using business systems is our number one priority. Now, here is your host, Sam Gupta.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the WBS Podcast. I'm Sam Gupta, your host and principal consultant at digital transformation consulting firm Elevate IQ. If you're responsible for managing operations for your organization, you will find yourself caught in the middle. On one side, you have a sales team that may not commit to driving predictable sales, but they will not allow you to miss even one delivery, even if it may be out of your control. Then on the other side, you have unpredictable factors such as workers not showing up on time or truck drivers not meeting their commitments. Finally, you need to make sure you can plan facility expansion, staffing, and training. You are also responsible for maintaining the quality of your products while maintaining all the regulatory compliance, including the health and safety of your employees. That's a lot. And there is no way you can do all of that on papers, spreadsheets, or disconnected systems. So, what systems do you need to build the annual operating plan? But most importantly, which systems will help you deliver on that plan? Is ERP enough, or do you need more than that? In today's episode, we invited a panel of cross-functional experts for a live interview on LinkedIn who brings significant expertise to discuss information architecture for the operations department. We covered many grounds, including how to start on the annual operating plan and the systems and data points you might need to build your operations plan. Finally, we discussed concepts such as how to incorporate risks into your operating plan, where IIoT fits in the planning and operational execution, whether quality, health and safety, and SVC fit in the architecture. With that, let's get to the conversation. Hello everyone! For today, we are going to be living the life of the operations executive, operations manager. We are going to be talking about the operations of a manufacturing facility or the distribution facility. On that note, we are going to start with the introductions first, and then we are going to dig right into the topic. I am going to start with you, Dave Chrysler. Can I ask you to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Sam. My name is Dave Chrysler, and I own an operations consulting company called the Chrysler Club, where we work with owners in the manufacturing, construction, and cannabis spaces to help them create the systems they need to reclaim their life and grow their business. And I come to you today with more than 20 years in the manufacturing space, directly responsible for operations of multiple facilities. So thanks for having me, Sam.
Okay, amazing. Thanks for being here, Dave. Mike Schlagenhofer, can I move to you next for your intro, if you don't mind?
Sure, Sam. Thanks for having me here today. My name is Mike Schlagenhofer, and I'm a manufacturing consultant for an insurance company. In my role there, I provide consulting services for manufacturing companies as small as 1 and 2 people to companies that have hundreds of people. Never know what hits me the day because we cover everything from woodworking to food processing or in between. And before I came to Acuity, my background is 30-some plus years of actually being an operations or a shop floor manager.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much for being here, Mike. And I was thinking that I almost got your last name, but probably not. Okay, next time. I'm going to try it. All right, Mike Ryan, can I move to you next for your intro if you don't mind?
Absolutely. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Mike Ryan. I am colloquially known as the inventory iceberg crusher. What I do is help middle market B2B manufacturers and distributors identify operational obstacles, create actionable solutions, and reach their financial targets to increase profits. Ultimately, the problem I solve is help take some of the inventory, which is frozen, and turn it into cash. And typically it's through the lens of sales and operations planning. So thank you for having me today, Sam.
Okay, and today we are going to be living the life of the operations guy as opposed to the sales guy. Thank you so much for being here, Mike. All right, Chris, can I move to you next for your intro if you don't mind?
Sure. Hello, everybody. I'm Chris Garridini, President and owner of Turnkey Technologies. So we've been implementing ERP solutions for 3+ years. I look forward to the conversation. Thank you.
Okay, love it. Thank you so much, Chris. Mark, can I move to you next for your intro?
Yes, thank you, Sam. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mark Lilly, President and CEO of LillyWorks. Long 35-year career helping manufacturers with managing production. In particular, our team founded several ERP systems, ProfitKey, Visual Manufacturing. Embedded in both of those were traditional finite scheduling, which was excellent, as are in many ERP systems. We found and still find today a lot of companies struggling with production scheduling and traditional MRP. And we brought a new spin to that with LillyWorks. Look forward to the conversation today.
Okay, amazing. And looking forward to hearing how that is going to be relevant to our operations executive and operations managers. Thank you so much for being here, Mark. All right. So we are going to dig right into the topic. So Dave, obviously you are going to start and you are going to be setting the stage. So the first thing that any operations executives are going to do is your annual operating plan. And we know that it's a dark art to produce the annual operating plan and deliver on that. Obviously, Dave, you are a big fan of the systems because you know how hard the job of our operations manager is to produce the plan and deliver on that. So let's talk about, if we look at the plan, what all systems do you need to touch to be able to produce that plan, where you are going to get the data from, do these systems need to be connected when you are fetching the data to be able to create the plan. So describe day in the life scenario for the operations executive or the manager. And you're laughing. I know you are going to enjoy this.
Well, yeah, thanks, Sam. I'm laughing because, yes, the operational planning can be a bit of a dark art, as many people will say. But, when it comes to the system side of things, that's really where the rubber meets the road, so to speak, because having the ability to rely on the data that the systems are providing to you. So, give you one example from my past experience working in a print manufacturing company, medium-sized, $20 million a year print manufacturing company. We were using an ERP system that was fully integrated ERP, and having the ability to access the data coming out of that is really the starting point for any of the operational considerations from a planning standpoint. So, and we would go through I don't want to say a multi-stage planning, but, depending on exactly when we were starting that planning, and most of the time for us in that particular situation, we were starting the planning cycle, a solid 18 months ahead of time, which was always a challenge, right? That's kind of where it comes into the, bit of the dark art because you're forecasting so far in advance. But, the ability to access the data from the ERP and then tie that into, where we needed to be from a budgetary standpoint was obviously, very beneficial to us. So touching on the systems that we utilized, obviously on the ERP side, the MRP side of things, and taking a look at, historical data, as well as trying to forecast out from a budgetary standpoint where we wanted to be, what we were going to need to do in order to execute against that. And then obviously just kind of laying out the framework, the groundwork to be able to do that. And as we got closer to, cycling into that next year, starting to starting to execute against that plan, and then obviously fine tuning. We would look at it on a quarterly and a monthly basis to continue to fine tune as we started to roll into that. So.
Okay, amazing insights there. So, in your experience, let's say if I ask a clarifying question overall from the system perspective, and obviously today's topic is going to be more from the architecture perspective, is ERP going to be enough, or were you using, let's say, 20 different spreadsheets to maintain the data along with the ERP to produce the plan, or was ERP enough for you in your base?
Yeah, what we would do, Sam, and thanks for asking that because I didn't really jump into that, but we would really take at a high level the data dumps out of the ERP, and then we would start to fine tune those. So we would do that most of the time through Excel. So we would take a data dump and then try to go through and summarize some of that information because even in the report writers that we had access to, and I felt that they were pretty good. I still felt like the manual manipulation needed to be there from an outside perspective. So kind of third party, right? Bringing that data into Excel and having the ability to manipulate that and kind of look at it from a summary standpoint, depending on what I was trying to plan for and what I was really looking at. But the ability to do that was kind of key for me. So that was the process that I like to follow. Because again, I found that our specific ERP and even with access to that report writer, while you had access to all of the data points within the ERP, it wasn't great at summarizing and helping you actually put together an operational plan that was going to help you, create your budget and kind of go through the rest of that planning process. So that was what I did to be able to, to really put a plan together and to be able to execute again.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much, Dave. So, Mike, I'm actually going to move to you. So, in your days when you did the operations planning, and I'm talking about, I'm trying to not to butcher your last name, and I am intentionally trying to avoid that. My client, I'm actually going to call you my client, okay? And I'm calling Mike today. Okay. So, Mike, in your days when you did the operations planning, were the data points enough when you looked at the ERP system? Did you have to overlay any other data sets, let's say from the industry or from the history? How did you do your operations planning? How many systems did you utilize? And maybe if you can dumb it down for me, because obviously I'm extremely naive. If you look at me and you do not give me the operations plan, I'm not going to be qualified for that. So let's say if you are trying to teach a person who does not have as much experience in the operations planning, what are different systems do they need? And how are they going to be doing the planning if they plan for operations?
Well, I kind of piggyback on what Dave said. Once you have that and say, hey, we want to sell $5 million of XYZ. Then the question is, how do I get there, right? So you need to go back to your history and says, what did it take me to get to that 1 million? And then, okay, that's what it takes to 1 million. Can I just multiply this by 5 to get there? Well, then you got to say, do I have the equipment, right? So you got to go at your equipment. What is your equipment? How does it play in? How was it utilized? What was your uptime? What was your downtime? So really, I have the machines, but half the time it doesn't run. So you have to take all of these factors in. And in my life and in my experience, really, I have never had a system that could take all of that data. So we went basically what Dave said is, you pull the data out of all of the system and then you transfer it in Excel. That's what we use. And play the different scenarios and says, okay, if we base our 5-year forecast or goals and demands on the last 2 years, well, here's where we leak, here's where we weak, here's where we're failing, here's where we're falling behind. And then you go back into your system to drive into why did we fail? What's the data telling us that has happened or that didn't happen? And then take that to make your adjustments on your planning, and then you can budget for it and says, you know what, if you really want to go from 1 million to 5 million in the next 18, 24 months, we need to spend that much capital. Why don't you pull that back in and says, well, we only make an X dollars and we want to spend Y dollars on capital. How can we match that? Then you're going to start looking at to financing this, where do I get the cash flow? You have to put that back into a system because now your expenditure ledger changes. And I think we always like to play this in the Excel with the data that we had. Most likely case, dreamland, this is really when everything falls into place and things are just click. And here's probably what happens in reality because things don't work out. And that's where I found out that all the different functions of ERPs, and especially when they connected with your MES and to your suppliers and potentially to your customers, give you a way better data set that you can work with. So your chance to hit that 95% accurate planning to reality is probably greater than when you just rely on one system, because we would cross-reference, just give you an example. You talked about training, right? Training an ops guy. Well, I'm talking more about training my operators. I can buy equipment relative easy and quick because money is easy to borrow. Equipment is, well, right now in a little bit of an equipment crisis, but normally equipment machines are easy to buy. However, how do I staff that on the learning curve of a person? So I go back in my human resource system and pull that out and says, if I need to bring 10 operators, what was the learning curve of those operators based on data entry on payroll? When did they become a full employee? So that's where the whole thing goes to back. But I go back to what Dave said. Ultimately, we throw it in Excel. And I hope that maybe Chris or Mark or Mike have something else that you can say. We have a system that eliminates that. But I did pretty much the same thing as Dave.
Very interesting. So I don't know, Mike, if you want to touch a little bit more in terms of, how many facilities you had and how much time did you guys really spend in this planning? Because when you are saying that, I am looking at my ERP system, I'm looking at my MES system, I'm also looking at my HR system, because that is actually telling you the trend, how much time did it take for them to completely onboard so that they can be productive? And then I don't know if you had any other systems for your asset management. There could be so many different things, and I can almost guarantee that all the data sets are not going to be enough from the system perspective. So you might be overlaying some of the data right inside the spreadsheet. So the question to you is going to be, how long did it take for you to plan this, and how many facilities did you have when you were planning this?
Well, we had 4 facilities in 3 states. So there was 1 facility in South Dakota, 1 in Wisconsin, and 2 in Minnesota. So what we did is 1 was more of an R&D and product development. So really did it their own planning, because they really didn't make a product that made it to the customer. So the 3 facilities work very closely together with demand and capacity schedule. What can I run by you? What products are you more effective? And what products can I run in another facility? And then to get back to the one of your question was, when did we start the planning process? I think it started the day I walked in, and it ended for me the day I walked out. Because I don't want to offend anybody here, but if you want God to laugh, tell him your plan, right? So a plan is just that what it is. And one of my mentors told me, don't have 1 backup plan, have 3 backup plans, because 1 will not save. But I think as time moved on and we got more comfortable with using all of the system, you talked about asset tracking. We used the CM, computerized maintenance management system. We told our schedulers could look into that system and says, those machines are down 40 hours a year for maintenance, right? That is required maintenance that they have to be down if they run at 85% capacity. They're going to be down. So I lose a whole week's production of that machine. So we can plan that now in, because our CMMS system was able to tell me, out of the 10,000 hours this machine was available, you lost 80 hours due to required maintenance, and you had 120 hours for unplanned failure. So now I can go back to my master plan and say, buddy, instead of 10,000 hours, you only got 9,800 hours available. So don't plan that to 100% capacity, because what you're forcing me to do is run overtime, pay time and a half for a part that I already only make 15 cents on it, right? So does that answer your question a little bit?
It does. Thank you so much, Mike, for that. So, Mike Ryan, I'm actually going to move to you next, because obviously you are super excited about this conversation, because you know for a fact that either these guys did not incorporate enough variables in their planning. Because when you actually look at your SNOP planning, and we have looked at a lot of different systems together, that you need a lot more data points that are not going to be supported by your traditional ERP systems, traditional MES system, CMMS system. Even if you combine all of that for planning, you need far more data points, and they are going to be things that are not going to be probably related to your operations, because you are looking at seasonality, you are looking at a lot of different factors that actually drive the planning. So in your experience, I mean, you obviously prescribe that SNOP system everybody should be using. They should not be planning on the spreadsheet. So in your experience, what have been your experience when people plan on the spreadsheet versus when they plan on the system? And maybe you want to address the question from the audience, how you incorporate the risk and how you uncover the risk.
Okay, so I'm going to start off, Mike. I love that saying that man plans and God laughs. It's true, right? Because as soon as you print a plan, before the ink is dry, right, the plan is wrong. The question is always, how wrong is the plan? So from an S&OP perspective, I always like to step back, and my favorite question is, okay, what's the problem we're trying to solve? And when we're casting the annual operating plan, typically we start at the highest level. All right, let's understand what the sales target is for the year. S&OP process talks about in what ways we're going to achieve that target. And then depending on who the consumers of that data will be, depends, right? That determines how much data is needed. So if I look at it, how I've worked with previous clients, it's starting at that top level, and then yes, the more mechanization you can have in the system to help blow it down, top level from a demand perspective to an item level to a customer item level. Yeah, the more you can do it in the system, the more repeatable and reproducible it would be. But ultimately, it's figuring out, how do I plan to the level that's needed and not any deeper, because the plan's going to change. So once we get to the point where we have the alignment on the demand through the S&OP process, then it goes to the supply side and says, do I have, based on the requirements, do I have the capacity and capability to produce these parts, these products, when they're needed and in the quantities they're needed? And then typically I've seen a lot more of the heavy lifting really happen on the supply planning side of house, because it's blowing down into individual components and then taking that down to the material level, and then at some point rolling that back up to create aggregated demand on the supply side for sourcing and procurement to go work their magic. So in a very long and windy way, what I would say is work at the highest aggregate level as possible, and then rely on the systems as much as possible for the blowdown and the support of the plan at the detailed level. May not be the answer you were looking for, Sam, but that's what I've seen as really the most effective integration of using the system to support the process.
And you know me, Mike. Let me see, if I'm not satisfied with the answer, I'm going to have millions of follow-up questions. You know how I work, right? Okay.
I do.
So first thing, do you want to address the question that the audience is asking about, how do you incorporate risks in the plan?
Okay. Awesome question, especially given the world we've operated in the last 18 months. Step one is come up with that mid case. Here is the case that we think is most likely going to happen. Step two is to put guardrails around that plan, whether it's plus or minus 5%, 10%, 15%, 20%. Understand how much risk, whether it's upside risk or downside risk, the business is willing to tolerate. From that point, once you establish, those the high side and the low side, really it becomes like a trigger or a tripwire to say, hey, if my demand falls by 7%, here are the actions that I'm going to take as a business, whether it's putting out a promotion to help spur demand or taking out costs on the supply side. So the scenario, and we called it scenario planning, the high-low planning. The scenario planning is crucial to establish, almost you can call it the electric fence. What happens when you hit that fence, and what are the predefined actions that a business is going to take? Right? Because the worst time to make a plan is when you're kind of neck deep. So you want to at least have an idea of in what ways a business can respond, before they hit that cliff.
Yeah, Sam, I was just going to add to what Mike was saying, but, from a higher level, from a risk assessment standpoint, we would do kind of detailed risk assessments and planning on a fairly frequent basis because, kind of back to your point, Mike, right? You have to understand what potential risks there are, and that's going to be different for different types of businesses. And then to be able to understand, not just from a demand perspective, but from a catastrophic perspective, right? We want to make sure we understand all of the potential risks that are out there that could impact our business, and have some sort of mitigating plan. Whether that, in my case with the kind of previous example I gave, we had a other facilities that we could offload work to if it was something like a natural disaster or something like that. But I felt like I wanted to toss that in there on top of what Mike was saying. Is very good points, Mike.
Yeah, thank you. And David, I'd like to add on to that, in that I think, and I'd be curious to get your thoughts. I think there's kind of a line where there's risk that can be identified inside of the process, and then there's like that catastrophic risk. And the way I've seen that dealt with is to have like, excuse me, a formal business continuity team. So when those extraordinary events happen, there are existing plans in place. So, if you've got a plant in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and a tornado comes through, right, who you need to contact, and how you're going to deploy, people and resources to help stabilize that one location, and then reroute all your inbound from that plant to another plant. So yeah, I think that is a fantastic point. Thank you.
Okay, guys, thank you so much. So, before I come to you, Mike, I want to give an opportunity for Chris and Mark to be able to speak, just because they did not have any time to speak. Okay, Chris. So, in your case, what do you think? These guys, Dave and Mike, they are doing the planning on a spreadsheet, but the kind of planning that Mike Ryan is trying to describe, in my head, I don't think you can pull that off on a spreadsheet unless you are not planning now. And that is my experience when I look at the businesses. When they are planning on a spreadsheet, they are typically not planning enough. They are not going to have enough data that you are going to require for your planning, the way Mike Ryan has described. So in your experience, how many different systems that you have seen for operations manager that they typically use, and how do they plan?
Sure. And so one thing I'll say is not ERPs are created equally. So there are some that have more capability, but I do agree that there are multiple systems in place. And Mike Ryan was correct. The starting point on this operational planning is we're talking about sales forecasting. And there's always this conversation about what can we do? And that's derived from a couple places. So first of all, the ERP is going to have your historical sales. And a lot of people say, hey, we're forecasting 10% growth. Great. Does that mean you can take every customer and increase 10% and think they're all going to perform the same? But it's a starting point as you build the sales forecast. And we start with historical data, which comes from the ERP. Great. And then there's a conversation, customer by customer, right? Even if we look at analytics on, are they trending up? Or are they trending down? So we got to go in and rate every customer that's buying last year and adjust that. And then we have to go to our CRM system, right? Because now I need to know about, well, who are the new customers that we don't have yet that you're going to forecast for next year? So we take current customers, anticipated growth by customer, start there, and then we turn around and add CRM data based on forecast probabilities. Okay, does that give us a close look at the next fiscal year? And that's the starting point. So ERP, CRM data, it's coming in there, and then where do we go from there? Well, then there's a number of metrics that have to be calculated. First of all, we've heard capacity. Well, how do we define? Can we produce that much? And there's physical capacity, there's labor capacity, there's volumetric capacity. A lot of people don't take volumetric. And then, again, there's more factors. There's seasonality. And then we look at, am I going to have more overtime in the fall than in the spring? And so, to your point is there one system that allow you to workbench all that? No, there's not. In the end, what's going to drive the performance of the manufacturing execution is going to be that sales forecast. Once it's firm, agreed upon, great. I mean, there's other things. We'll keep going. There's a lot of systems. So in sub-ledger forecast, we'll turn into financial forecast, but we're talking about sales forecast. That's units, right? Okay, well, now to substantiate, we talked about planning capacity. Do we have a capital spend to add more capacity to hit the forecast? Okay, do I need a labor increase to hit the forecast? And part of the labor forecast is we're working on the human capital. And now we've got people and we've got rates and costs. And guess what? The labor forecast goes up. Okay, do I have planned hires? Guess what? That needs to circle back around. And now guess what? Now we're not talking financial, but we're going to impact our standard costs. And we're going to go, Well, based on all this, my financial forecast, I've got more labor costs, I've got capital expansion, a lot of moving pieces. And I'm going to say that there are people that will have to take it out to Excel to do some of the calculations to plug back in. A lot of systems aren't going to do your volumetric, meaning if you look at your planning and you think about inventory levels and min-maxes and economic order quantities, if you bought everything to bring it up to the levels, do you fill up your building? Ooh, it's not big enough. So there's capital considerations, there's volumetric considerations. Sometimes those are taken offline because a lot of systems don't have those mechanisms to build that. We would certainly need cube information by item to anticipate capacity problems, but just as we're factoring labor and trying to rationalize overtime and seasonalities, do I build more off-season for the demand in the fall, but then I'm back to the cube, right? Will it fit if I build all this inventory? We've got a client that does furnaces, right? Wintertime. So they're building inventory in the spring for winter. Well, they've had excessive labor. Overtime? How do you flatten out the production curve? So that there's not a lot of systems that are going to help you rationalize that either. So again, what you're hearing is there's multiple systems. A lot of the ERP systems, lucky for me, is those subledger forecasts will roll into financial forecasts, but they iterate, right? And then as we heard, what's the risk? What could go wrong? What could go right? What if we're really successful? What if we can't get materials? And I think the other aspect, data, right? Our supplier data has to be so perfect, meaning reorder points, lead times, meaning, man, I got to have a lot of things lined up so that when I finally say that's my forecast and I run my master planning, it says, oh my gosh, you should have bought that last year. So there's a lot of moving pieces, but an ERP is going to hold a lot, but again, I'm going to agree with everybody that we're going to take data out and we're going to use some one-off systems to do some of those calculations. In the end, we're going to plug it back into the ERP and hopefully master planning will execute and help us drive a delivery on the plan. But again, we're still going to have to iterate and still have to revisit it periodically. So please redirect any questions, Sam.
Okay, amazing. Love your insight. So since you were so insightful, you know that you are going to get a really, really spicy question today. Okay, so that's going to be one of the comments that you made about the historical. And you mentioned that, you know what, you go to your ERP to find the historical data. Now, the question is going to be, ERP systems have their life cycle. Okay, maybe you are going to be replacing every 5 years, 8 years. I don't know what is going to be your planning horizon, whether it's going to be 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. So now, when you are going to replace, we both know, Chris, ERP is not going to have the historical data. I don't know if a lot of industries really keep the historical data. So in your experience, if ERP is not going to have that, where are you going to keep that data and how are you going to do your planning?
Sure. And in the concept where we do migrate people from the legacy systems, the ERP data, the historical data typically lives side by side in a data warehouse where there's a composite perspective on trending and customer purchases. But I think as we look at the forecast, again, how far back are we going to go to anticipate what are they going to buy this year? Is it going to be based on last year's sales, a 3-year average? What if they're trending up? So there can be some complex mathematics applied to each customer's behavior, trending up, trending down. And again, if you're really, and that's where some people have to go to Excel because the complexities in their formulas to anticipate purchases. But to your point, you may need to go get legacy data, commingle it, plug the forecast back in. Some tools are great. They're going to show you the sales history right below the forecast. Say, hey, add 10%, move it up into that field. And that's simple, easy. But you're correct. We're not always going to have that history if we've done a migration recently.
All right. Amazing. Love it. Thank you so much, Chris. So Mark, this is going to be your show. So you are going to be describing whether you agree with the spreadsheet planning, whether you guys, you like the way these guys are planning. Are they planning enough? Do you believe that you are going to have the other variables that you are going to require in the planning? How many different systems are going to be utilized in planning and whether they need to be connected or siloed?
Yeah, so I've heard a lot of different areas. I've heard sales planning, financial planning, operational, what I would say manufacturing operational planning, and frankly that's where I live, right? Is manufacturing operational planning. So I mean, even 25 years ago, you could take in certain ERPs, you could take your certainly your current set of work orders and your firmed orders and even your planned orders that MRP generated and run them through even a finite scheduling program, right? To see, a year, 2, 3 out what your capacity picture looks like at the time. And even do what ifs within that ERP. So that capability exists. It's existed for a long time. I think what a lot of companies struggle with that I hear today is it's not so much really long. It's kind of the midterm issues like how can I figure out how many people I will need? I've got this huge backlog of orders, whether it's, even just a month from now or 2 or 3 months from now. How can I see any sort of picture of my future reality that makes sense, that's going to show me truly how many folks I would like to have, right? Where they're hiring as fast as they can anyways, but really how many would I like to, whether it's people, machines, or what have you. What items should I consider outsourcing? Now you get into some of the costing, which is an interesting conversation too. And I think what we can't discount is the alternative methods that are found, unfortunately, not in today's ERP systems. Because what we find today is traditional cost accounting, right? Where we're looking for a unit price, where we're including overhead in the cost of the product, so that when we're doing pricing, we're only looking at a fully loaded cost. And I think folks need to back up and look at, for example, contribution margin analysis, right? Value added revenue analysis, you might call it. It also goes by throughput accounting, for example. So we're looking at not just because generally speaking, folks are paying the same amount, week to week, month to month for their labor and overhead, right? Typically. So the question then becomes, beyond the material costs and outside services, what is my value added revenue? What is that difference between my revenue and those material outside service costs, and getting a picture of the contribution margin? There's a phenomenal book called The Measurement Nightmare by Deborah Smith that goes deep into this concept, even to the point where she's developed examples of financial statements using both traditional cost accounting as well as contribution margin analysis. And it's a fascinating and very unique way to look at the health of your business, and then moving that into a capacity picture as well, and actually being able to see what your future capacity looks like, and being able to answer that question: how many more people, how many more machines would I like to have in order to get my orders out on time, is a real eye opener.
Okay, amazing. So the follow-up question that I'm going to have is going to be around what the question the audience is asking. And we have had a very heated debate last time overall, where Industry 4.0 fits in the planning horizon, in the life of an operations manager. And that typically throws everybody off, to be honest, especially when you're looking at this more from the operations planning perspective. So now the question, Phil is asking, okay, you need an IIoT platform, because that is what is going to give you the real time visibility in your capacity. And Mike Ryan had mentioned that, your real problem is going to be more on the supply side. Okay, so Mark, where do you see IIoT platform fit into the operations manager life?
So I think it's more, for me, it's more of a question of what does it need to support, and what questions does it need to answer for operations people, right? And while we're talking about long-term planning or midterm planning and that sort of thing right now, that's extremely important. What I find is, whether it's a $10 million company or a $100 million company, what many are struggling is just visibility of the here and now. The tools that whether it's traditional MRP or traditional finite scheduling embedded in ERPs, folks can't get the operations managers can't get the answers for their people very simply in terms of what job should I be working on right now in any department, right? Do I have the material? Can I build this thing right now? I mean, it's a very deep problem. These ERP systems are wonderful. They have wonderful functionality, but essentially the production management tools in them have not been looked at since the 70s and 80s. So folks are still struggling with this just simple level of visibility. So that's what I say, Sam, is that folks need to explore that technology and make sure it's going to answer those questions for them, so that they can do the best they can with the limited capacity that they have, to get their orders out on time, to have some integrity with their customers about the delivery of those orders as promised, and then based on that, being able to predict their future in any way in order to do this long-term planning as well.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much, Mark.
So I got a couple of things to backtrack. I think the question about risk assessment, being in the insurance business, that's often forgotten in a plan, right?
Yep.
Because we've been planning, we've been hitting our targets, and I think something to throw out there basics is, I think Mike mentioned as, what risk am I, what pain level do I want? And we call that, I put that back to SPC. You have an upper controllable and a lower controllable, and then you put your reaction limit. Like you said, I'm willing to take a 10% loss, but at 7%, I'm going to react. Now I'm going to go back to the IIoT thing, and I think something that is still in the infancy, that my company is playing a little bit around in the risk management. There's AI out there, right? Because ERP is historical data, right? We need to understand our history so we can semi-accurately predict the future. As more we know our history, as better the data is, I think it's better we can plan. And I think there's where AI can come in and take that history and run all those scenarios. But to some of the things that Mark said, I think things like digital twin will help with planning in the future, because you can lay that factory out and you can run those scenarios in real life and see, and you know what, all my data says this is fine, but suddenly in the digital twin says, oh, we didn't plan for the labor increase, right? We didn't plan for this to happen. We didn't plan for supply chain constraints. I think those things are coming in right now. Again, when I did the operations planning, we dreamed of this stuff. I think in some things it is available. It is here. I think larger companies playing with it. Like I said, our Acuity is playing with AI, with predicting what happens when a storm comes in. Okay, here's the damage, but how do we rebuild that damage? What do we do? You just saw that with the housing prices, right? Got a $500,000 home. The housing prices or the material prices go up. Guess what? We have to pay you $600,000 to rebuild. I think those tools that come with Industry 4.0, like digital twin, even blockchain, I think, when you get out of the cryptocurrency, I think if we start incorporating this, and then I say something that I deal with a lot, manufacturers are very traditional, and I don't want to get away from my Excel sheet because I have control. I can manipulate the number instead of trusting a system that takes a million historical data points, and then I run it through my digital twin scenario and say, based on this data point, boy, your spreadsheet isn't going to keep up with me anymore. So does that make sense? I'm trying to answer three different questions that came up here, but I think there is some great stuff on the horizon that companies develop that play in this around. I think in 5 years, if we have this conversation again, I think we're going to sit here and say, hey, dude, just buy this thing, plug it in, and you're going to be 99.79% accurate. Right now, you're doing good at 75%, but I think technology is developing, ERP systems developing. The other thing is you talk about your supplier, your fine. You got to link your systems in. Yeah, I have only my ERP. I can only look at my data. I don't know how my suppliers did during that same time, right? So when we start getting those systems to talk consistently, I think the planning process actually might make fun at some time.
Yeah, and my friend, Chris here is smiling because, there is a little bit of massive shift here going from planning on the spreadsheet to all of a sudden doing blockchain and AI. There is an intermediary step there. Okay, we probably need to have some sort of, SNOP planning system that we even implement in the architecture before we get too far and try to implement either AI or blockchain. Obviously, that's going to take more time. But right now, I think the customers that we sort of work with, in our experience, we are really struggling to implement ERP for the last 40 years. They still don't have the ERP adoption. So first, let's get that, and then we can talk about the other technology. Dave, I am actually going to come back to you. So one of the systems that Mike actually mentioned that we did not cover so far, and that is a crucial system. I don't know whether you had that in your architecture or not. It's called SPC. He mentioned that. Now, what is the role of the SPC system in the architecture? I don't know if you're familiar with that, but that is going to be for when you have, let's say, you want to optimize your process. So what you need to do is you are actually going to be monitoring your upper limit, lower limit, and then you are going to be figuring out, okay, what is happening with my process, and based on that, you are going to be optimizing that. So it's sort of real-time quality control. Typically, when you do quality control, you don't necessarily do the quality control in real time. You are going to do first article inspection, and based on that, you are going to decide whether my products are good enough to be able to ship or not. But SPC is actually going to provide you the problem areas in the process so that you can fix those. So the next segment that I really wanted to cover is going to be really training, health and safety, and those are going to be responsibility of the operations manager as well, and the quality. So in your experience, what all systems are going to be needed to cover all of this, the other responsibilities of the operations manager?
Yeah, that's a lot to unpack there, Sam. But thanks for lining me up with it. So we did not have a system like that, like Mike had mentioned, in terms of something automated that we could monitor that would control kind of upper limits and lower limits. I've my experience is a lot on the job shop side of things, but what we did do from a quality perspective was a little bit more manual. So, from that standpoint, we were doing quality inspection throughout, documenting those in, again, an offline system to be able to monitor those. So, getting back to kind of the overall system architecture of things, I would say the other things outside of the planning, that we had already unpacked was really a lot of manual systems kind of strung together in my experience. So even on the HR and onboarding side, that would be handled, pretty much in a manual fashion, a manual system. And the size operations that I was responsible for on the low end would maybe have been 15 or 20 employees, on the high end, 150 employees. So, from an HR training perspective, a lot of that, again, was done manual fashion. We're talking about training records, ongoing training, any type of additional employee documentation. All of those would be handled in really what I could classify as kind of manual offline systems. There's not a lot of integration into any of the other, definitely not into ERP or anything like that. So that was how we would handle those types of situations. But I also wanted to kind of jump back to something that Mike had said in terms of the planning side of things for some people. And really, Gus, it kind of touched on something that Mike and Chris both said in terms of the forecasting and standard costs and all of that stuff. Part of the reason that stuff lived outside of the ERP, and back to your point, why I think it's going to stay there for quite a long time before we get to all the fun AI crazy stuff, is just the fact that when you start looking at that, because of the trickle down, because of what it impacts. So, again, you start talking about the resource side of things, the asset management side of things. When you start talking about that standard cost accounting and creating those forecasts, from my experience, there was really no other way to put all of that into something that you could see, kind of physically see, to be able to play out those scenarios in your planning process. So I just wanted to mention that again, because back to your actual question, a lot of those other systems that we utilized were manual, not really tied together when it came to, health and safety, even the quality, training, all of that stuff. We had systems for each one, but it was handled very much in an offline fashion, very manually.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much, Dave, for that. So, Mike Ryan, I'm actually going to come to you. So, obviously, the planning is beautiful, but rubber really meets the road when you are going to be doing the real execution. So, in your experience, when we look at the responsibilities of the operations manager, that's going to be quality management. It's going to be your staffing. Oh my goodness, it's all over the place, right? So, what has been your experience? Do companies typically use a separate system? Is ERP going to be enough? What is going to be the system landscape like in your experience in fulfilling other responsibilities?
So if we look at quality, I've seen quality data and collection done or captured in JD Edwards. Safety is typically a standalone system, whether it's an HR IT system. So quality, yes. Safety, not typically systematized. If it is, it typically, unless, and I'll say this, in those industries where there are where they are heavily regulated and there are dedicated environmental health and safety people. The systems I've seen utilized tend to be more on the homegrown side than as opposed to the more structured and supported outside of the business side. So for quality, yes, I've seen data captured, SPC charts created, and I think really, the one thing I want to take a step back on is kind of that separation between the planning and the execution. Planning happens inside the system on one side of the house, and then the execution of that and performance to the plan. So, how long was a work order opened, and how long did it take to close? And there are some operational metrics. I think JD Edwards, I've seen some really nice shop floor systems to track like that executional performance. So again, I think it comes back to what's the problem we're trying to solve, and in what ways we're going to use the data. So if we're looking at throughput metrics or quality metrics, having that inside the system where you plan, right, it's absolutely helpful, because then you can use that as a feedback to help refine future plans. Did that answer your question, Sam?
It does. It does. Thank you so much, Mike. So, Chris, I'm actually going to come to you. In your experience, when we look at the other responsibilities, and maybe you want to address the comment as well. Obviously, the digitization of the quality system is going to be key. I think in case of Dave's scenario, I think they were using more of the disconnected quality system. When you are going to have the quality system that is going to be embedded as part of your process, you can get far more data overall from the quality, regulatory compliance. There's just so much that goes on with respect to quality. So what have you seen in your experience?
So in my world, I've got a couple flavors. It's certainly in the big Dynamics F&O application, quality is embedded. And so you've got quality on your inbound, and then you've got quality throughout your manufacturing process. It's pretty elegant where it creates the quality orders. So it's embedded. It is very elegant in that manner. And I've got smaller systems where we've got to do a bolt-on. So it's just not as intimate with the process. And then back to the comment about human capital systems and safety and certs and testing. So again, in the big system, I've got a pretty robust human capital where and the relationship between production planning and manufacturing is, again, it's the resources on routings. And so as we look at skills and certs, it's all integrated as we look at, okay, who can I put on a routing that can do this operation? It's going back to human capital. There's apps out there for workers to update certifications and tests and so forth. So again, in the big system model, it's there, it's inherent, it flows all the way through the system, even as you're doing that labor forecast and rolling that up. Smaller systems, you're bolting them on. You got a human capital, and so you're manually taking it from here and putting it over here. So I think it still depends on where you're at in terms of your hierarchy of systems and technology. And again, there are systems out there. The master planning does a wonderful job based on the forecast and drives manufacturing execution. So again, there are models where it's fully integrated. They're not 70s-based systems, but there is some pretty great stuff in the Dynamics platform. But we're not going to find it everywhere. And I think that is the people out here, you're not all running F&O because it's $1 million implementation. So you're like, okay, what do I got to do? You're finding silos, and you're still going to be sneaker netting some data from here to here. But it's still about finding the right tool that gives you that workbench to plan accurately, and then be able to revisit, because the plan isn't static through the year. We all know that. So we haven't talked a lot about, revisiting plans. But
okay, amazing. I think I'm good right now. Thank you so much, Chris.
Right.
So Mark,
Thanks,
I am actually going to come to you. Mark, so in your experience, when we look at the other side of the things, you are looking at the compliance, you are looking at health and safety, you are looking at training. There are so many things that operations manager need to do from the execution perspective. So what have you seen overall from the architecture perspective, system landscape perspective, with the companies that you work with?
Sure. So what I've seen a lot of, especially with smaller to medium-sized companies, is, and it doesn't happen often, but in the few that do, we've seen some really advanced approaches to training. So really, really deep and strong development of training programs in even smaller companies. I'm talking, 100 people or less. And so really spending the time. The ownership needs to be involved, because it's a big investment in time and money. But the training is a lot on the physical operations of the company in different areas, whether it's how to run a particular machine or set of machines, how to do certain operations, to the point where they're making videos and they're storing videos and technical documents and and then, getting that out on the shop floor in a systematic way so it's easy to access, and that having certifications, almost gamification coming into it, right? So now employees are gamifying, the getting educated, hey, how many points do you have? That type of thing, right? And especially with the younger folks who are, coming right off of Fortnite, in their living room, they love that. So that's really powerful. And then of course, ERP training is part of that. Usually it's specific to a function, whether it's a person in customer service and sales or purchasing or scheduling and that type of thing. But certainly there's at least one or two people in the organization who are, who kind of oversee the most of the ERP, right? And what a phenomenal training. I've found, folks who are in that position, I'm sure a lot of the other panelists too, it's almost, it might be better than an MBA, right? To actually live through all the processes in a company and understand them in depth and how they're interrelated and how they connect and how the data flows from one group within the company to the next. Those are some really smart people, and sometimes they don't, they're relatively average people, but after a fair amount of experience with an ERP system, they're very strong skills that can go anywhere, and oftentimes they're the facilitators of this other training in the throughout the organization as well.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much, Mark. So Mike, I don't know if you are going to have any short comments. I can only take short comments because we are super close to time right now related to the other responsibilities of the operations manager. If you have any comment you want to add. Mike Schlagenhofer, not Mike Ryan.
Well, I think that with planning on everything, you hit on two things, and that's not just because I work for an insurance company. It's safety, employee safety and training. And just to elaborate a little bit on what Mark says is there's AI on VR now out there, not AI, AR and VR out there to help this. Boeing company, they have goggles on, and when they lay the wires into this thing, they actually see the picture so that the wires for the things are in. I think the question just is, right now, there's so much in development. I think we need to put it connected. Like Chris says, yeah, you got $1 million ERP system. It's got a lot of bells and whistles. You got a $50,000 system. You're going to be lacking some things. So I think there's a compromise. But I kind of push it back to the accounting thing. I think accounting is even more traditional than manufacturing, and they like to not change. And I think a lot of those systems could make the cost roll up and the accurate forecasting if they would just trust the system. So that's the only thing I got to add there.
Okay, amazing, guys. So the only thing we can take right now is going to be closing advice. We have roughly 2 minutes. So I think we can only squeeze a couple of sentences, just one or two. Dave, I'll start with you. Closing advice for today.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. I would say, start with the systems that you have in place and make sure that you are pulling data out of those systems historically so you can try to forecast as you move forward. Make sure you understand your processes, how those relate to that planning effort. And then obviously you want to track and measure what you are planning on an ongoing basis.
Okay, love it. Thank you so much, Dave. Mike, Ryan, can I ask you for your closing advice?
Track the execution to the plan. Build the plan as much as possible in the system and then track performance versus actual.
Love it. Thank you so much. Chris, your closing advice.
I say once you get the plan validated, I've seen people make little fat finger mistakes and order 5 million of something instead of 5,000. You just, after you do all the work, just do the reasonable test, the highs and lows.
Love it. Thank you so much, Chris. Mike Schlagenhofer, what is your closing advice?
Well, you guys took all the things I wanted to say. I do agree, check your plan and don't just, yes, we planned it, look it over once and then put it away. Hold yourself accountable to what you did and react to it. Don't wait. Things don't get better when things go downhill. When you wait, it's worse.
Love it. Thank you so much. Mark, your closing advice, please.
If you're struggling with on time, look for alternative methods. Consider, instead of the old method of planning and then trying to execute the plan, what about focusing first on the execution?
All right. Love it. On that note, I really want to thank everybody for their time and insights.
Thanks, Sam.
You're welcome.
Thanks,
Good
Sam.
to meet you guys.
Thanks, Sam.
Everybody have a great day. Thank you.
I cannot thank our guests enough for coming on the show, for sharing their knowledge and journey. I always pick up learnings from our guests, and hopefully you learned something new today. If you want to learn more about Chris Gherardini, head over to turnkeytech.com. It's turnkeytec.com. If you want to learn more about Mike Schlagenhofer, head over to acuity.com. It's ACUITY.com. If you want to learn more about Michael Ryan, head over to amryangroup.com. It's MRYANGROUP.com. If you want to learn more about Dave Chrysler, head over to thechrysler.club. It's THECRYSLER.CLUB. If you want to learn more about Mark Lilly, head over to lilyworks.com. It's LILLYWORKS.com. Links and more information will also be available in the show notes. If anything in this podcast resonated with you and your business, you might want to check other related episodes, including the interview with Max Krug, who discusses what actions businesses need to take if they encounter product quality or business performance issues. Also, the interview with Ian Pratt, who discusses how to distinguish between the need for additional resources or operational bottlenecks that need to be optimized before investing further. Also, don't forget to subscribe and spread the word among folks with similar backgrounds. If you have any questions or comments about the show, please review and rate us on your favorite podcasting platform or DM me on any social channels. I'll try my best to respond personally and make sure you get help. Thank you, and I hope to catch you on the next episode of the WBS Podcast.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the WBS Podcast. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcasting platform so you never miss an episode. For more information on growth strategies for SMBs using ERP and digital transformation, check out our community at WBS.rocks. We'll see you next time.